I'll call to order the February 14th, 2023 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. You'll have an approval and a second, or a motion and a second to approve the January 10th, 2023 Commission meeting.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Next, I'll call on staff for the staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Chairman. It's been a slow startup to the year as it relates to construction. Starting in January, we reset the permit count of the residential single family, and we are at 0. So we don't have any new, although we've got plans for a couple. They haven't submitted the rest of the paperwork yet, so we're waiting for the builder to get their stuff in gear to start moving on that. We have several projects moving forward. On the commercial side, we have a tenant finish permit that should issue in a day or two for the old Clay County Tractor Building that is set to become a microbrewery. So once they start working on there, that'll happen pretty quick. Other than that, general construction still proceeds everywhere that you see construction proceeding. I anticipate a couple of projects coming in the next meeting or two related to new subdivisions, single phase subdivisions, busting one big tract of ground into 6 smaller tracts of ground for development, single family homes located here in the center of town. I anticipate that coming in the next, it's been filed, so it'll probably be April before you see it. So that's all I have from the planning side staff report. The city's attorney, John Reddick, is here. And I think it's appropriate that he give a presentation from a staff report standpoint as it relates to how you guys do some of the things you'll do. John, if you would, thanks.
Good evening. For those that don't know me, and particularly some of the public, my name is John Reddick. I'm the city attorney for Smithville, Missouri. I've been asked to address a rather unique issue that has come up before you a little bit here. It has to do with the next application. And it has to do with some allegations being made by Roberta Lohman and individually and on behalf of her trust, which have now been codified into a lawsuit that's been filed in Clay County, Missouri. There are some serious issues raised and allegations made in the lawsuit. As I understand it, they have been mirrored somewhat by earlier testimony or contact with this body about some of the issues involved. And even though they are serious and significant allegations, the issue that we're presented with is that we're not a court of law. We don't have any ability to, or any duty to, or should we delve into the legitimacy or the accuracy of the allegations as such. Under Missouri statutes, there is a recorded deed through which this applicant, under Missouri law, has good title at this point to this property. That title, that trustee's deed from Miss Lohman, dated 1/21 of 22 to LMW Investments LLC, was to convey tenements, rudiments, and apartments thereto belonging or in any way pertaining to unto the grantee, who was Miss Lohman's trust. So under Missouri law, what we've got is the lawful owner at this point, who's the applicant. Okay. So there may well be factual things that Ms. Lohman or others talk about that have to do with the type of issues that you need to address from a zoning standpoint. But the mere fact that the lawsuit's been filed is not in and of itself something for us to deal with. We don't have a court order from anybody on relevant to any of the allegations that are being made in this lawsuit. What we've got is an applicant who is, according to the recorder of deeds, the lawful owner of this piece of property. Now, were we not to proceed as if he had good title, which he does until a court says otherwise, then he could have a complaint against us for not doing so. So the city's not been named. We have no court order of any kind. And so we are presented with an applicant who is according to the deeds in the Clay County Recorder of Deed, the lawful owner of this piece of property. We need to proceed otherwise, as such. My understanding is we're back here because there was an inadvertent error communication between the city and the county with regard to the type of zoning. It's actually more dense, is that?
More
accurate?
intense.
More intense than was otherwise indicated, and that the Board of Aldermen want to make absolutely sure that the record was clear, that you all had the accurate zoning. So that's why we're back here. So if anybody's got any questions for me, let me do some things here before I go further. And I wanted to talk about why I'm adamant. The statute that I deal with in reference is 442-390. It has notice imparted from time of filing for the record. And the allegations being made by Ms. Lohman against Mr. Hartman at paragraph 95 of her petition is that he failed to make sure the deed and other documents properly indicated the restrictive covenants. Okay, so it's the deed about which she complains. Again, at paragraph 109, she makes complaint against Dan Hartman and Hartman Real Estate that they failed to make sure the express terms and conditions, the restrictions in the sale contract were properly included in the warranty deed. And then again at paragraphs 127, A and B, she makes complaint that the title company failed to properly read and review the express terms of the sales contract, which pertain to the restrictive covenants, and then failed to accurately draft the deed. So to me, there is an admission in the petition filed by Ms. Lohman that the deed with which we're presented doesn't bring the issues and complaints about her contract to our attention. And that's what we're faced with. We have a recorded deed and we have an applicant who is the grantee in that deed until some judge tells us otherwise. That's how we proceed in my mind. Anybody have any questions? Seeing none, I'll go home. Okay.
Thank you, John.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 4. I'm going to open a public hearing for the rezoning of northeast corner of Second Creek Bridge Road and Loman Road from A1 to R1B to R3. I'll first ask staff for an overview.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I provided in the packet to you a copy of the staff report for this particular project. I think the most important thing for you to be aware is this is the same application associated with your work in December on the same property where you made a recommendation for rezoning. There was an error made by me in not reviewing the map I printed from Clay County GIS records that was printed in 2019. So sometime prior to 2019, Clay County switched the zoning of a parcel on their map from B3 to R3. So it was an error, clearly an error. It was brought to my attention at that meeting and again later by the owner of that land, Mr. Lohman. We were able to go through the process and verify that the property was zoned B3, 3 acres on the corner, was zoned B3 some 30 years ago. There's been no action to change that. So as it relates to that, the staff report before you includes changing the character of the neighborhood stuff as it relates to the previous references to multifamily to business in that area. So business is in more intense use than R3, obviously. So that's the impetus of the staff report changes. All of those items related to the items you have to make in your proposed findings of, in your findings of fact are included in that staff report as well. And as you know, in the packet, I've also included a proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law document that you can use later. When we get to that section, I'll talk about that. But everything else in the December hearing is roughly the same, other than the B3 versus R3.
Thank you. I will say it again, as Brandy said a while ago, if there's anybody in the public who'd like to speak, make sure you fill out a public comment card. This time I'll ask Brandy about any comments that we need to hear from the public. And when you come to the podium, you'll be asked to state your name and address for record, and you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roberta Lohman. I'm at 16251 Lohman Road. I was not planning on announcing about a lawsuit tonight, but obviously it has been. And I would like to also let everyone know that Mr. Cox and LMW is also included in that lawsuit. Because as I've shared with you all before, I'm not looking for a court of law. What I was looking for to present my case, the way the land was sold, and the only way it would have been sold was based on the plat that Mr. Hartman or Alderman Hartman or Realtor Hartman, I'm not sure how to present him since he comes and makes presentations to the committee here. I'm not sure. And when I review the code of ethics for the city, it seems that the water's a little muddy on how he does represent himself when he comes to the microphone. But I am not opposed to development or progress in the city at all. I would have never sold the property if I was. What I'm opposing is the way the land is being proposed to be rezoned to an R1 and an R3, because the contract specifically stated that it was to be an R1 with single family homes between $400,000 and $500,000. I brought copies. I brought them at the last zoning committee meeting, and it was delayed because it went to the alderman, I think, whatever the process was. But I brought paperwork again that I will hand out to you all just to review. The top copy is a plat that Mr. Hartman provided to me at the time of the signing of the contract, which he had stated to me Mr. Hendricks had approved. And I again included the contract front page so you all could see it. The contract was never signed until he brought me this one and said, this is the plat that's going to be built, which was the third attempt on the contract. I'm not asking for any of you to make a decision based on law. I'm just asking you to please delay a decision based on what's absolutely right. So I will provide this to you all, and thank you for your time.
Pat Luce.
Hello, my name is Pat Luce. I live at 300 Maple Lane, Apartment 1 here in Smithville. I am speaking to you tonight as a person with deep roots in this community. My family has lived here for well over a century and has owned businesses here as well. I'm also the proud daughter of a World War II veteran who's buried just down the street here in our local cemetery. He earned a Purple Heart and 3 Bronze Stars for this service to our country. And he was a businessman here from 1947 until the day he died in 2012. And I'm sharing this with you because I want you to understand that this community is in my blood. It's in my DNA, and I am personally invested in this community. And that is why tonight I'm asking you to vote yes on the proposed zoning changes on the Second Creek Bridge Road and Loman Road so that the proposed development of the Second Creek Meadow project can go forward. And here are some of the reasons why I fully support this project. First of all, it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which was approved in November of 2020. This development will help ensure that people who serve this community, our young professionals, have the opportunity to work here as well as to live in this community. And the ability to not only work here, but to afford housing here is directly related to our ability to attract and retain professionals in our community. In addition, this project will address our aging population, our retirees who are looking to downsize. And currently, we do not have adequate housing options for these 2 segments of our population. The developer for this project is a local developer. This development will bring jobs to this community during the construction phase. And most importantly, this project will provide housing for our community, income for our city and schools when people reside here and make Smithville their home, and families will be raised here. It will ensure that our community continues to grow and to prosper. Please do not be distracted. Please follow the facts, the finding of the facts, and adhere to the comprehensive plan in all of your decisions tonight. Please vote what is right for our community and its future. Please approve the proposed funding as presented as it relates to the Second Creek Meadow project. Thank you.
If before Brandy calls the next name, if there are any, I forgot to do this in my presentation. I was presented, someone came in to speak to me today that wanted to come to speak to you but couldn't, and asked me to present their position to you. And I indicated that I can't do that on their behalf. The only way they could do that is to put something in writing and provide it to you directly. And that document I wanted to have on the record officially has been presented from Ms. Wood around the corner from the project area. So that should be considered as well. Sorry for the delay in getting that on the record.
Are there any other?
Is there anyone via Zoom that would like to speak on the subject?
Doesn't appear so.
Before I close the public hearing, I would like for all the committee members to go ahead and read this letter if you haven't done so. I'm just now getting ready to read it myself, so.
Sorry for the interruption. One last thing as well. In addition to reading that letter, you ought to take a look at the stuff that Ms. Lohman just presented you as well to make sure it's been reviewed.
You beat me to that, Jack.
Sorry.
Has everybody had a chance to read the letter and review the other documents from Sloman?
Yep.
If so, I will call the hearing closed. We'll move on to item number 5, which is the rezoning of northeast corner of Second Creek Bridge Road and Loman Road from A1 to R1B and R3. Do I have a first and a second?
So moved.
Second.
I think before us, we have the other finding of facts again. I don't know if anybody has any comments.
Been on the plat that we just got. So Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, but in August, we had a hearing on this part of this plat and carved off part of it for Hildebrand Estates, right? So this map that we were just handed is now impossible, correct? Which that was in August 9th of 2022.
So if you, on your map, you'll see two cul-de-sacs in an angle at the north end of it. And you can kind of see a drainage area through there.
Mhm.
Everything north of that is now part of Hildebrand Estates, a 11-acre tract that you approved months ago. The south portion is still identified.
Okay, just making sure.
Madam Chairman, if I can, I'll go real quick on these draft proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law. It's the same as the methods that you've used all in the past. Please review them. These will be your findings. If you make them, you have the ability to change them. If you don't think they're correct, you just need to make a motion to change this. This gives us a basic framework to work from. If there are no amendments, you can approve or you can approve the whole thing as once. Or if you feel more comfortable, Madam Chairman, you can go through each one of them and call a vote on each finding of fact. That is entirely up to you. That way, if there are any changes to those proposed findings, Brandy and I can make sure we get the correct language adjusted in it as they are approved.
On the finding of facts, so number 1, the characteristic of the neighborhood, the only thing that really changed in that was identifying the R3 to B3.
Yes,
That's the only change that we as a committee would notice in number
Yes.
1.
yes,
And number 2, I believe staff included this time around in the consistency with the city's comprehensive plan and ordinances. You outlined, was it about 5 items where this does fit into the comprehensive plan, one of the strategic pillars.
yes. Those were the most directly related to this particular project.
And
They-
what I would like to do is read those to those in attendance.
One, before you start there.
Yes.
One question, Jack, on number one. The B3 is our densest commercial zoning we have, correct?
Commercial, yes.
Yes. And
Yes.
Mr. Loman has no intent to change that.
Not expressed any intent. He wanted to make sure it stayed B3 whenever
And he
whenever
had that zoned in 1989.
I believe it was 89. His mother did that, yes.
It's been there for a while.
Yes.
Anything else on one before I go back to two? If not, I will read for the public the pillar that the comprehensive plan identified 5 different planning goals and strategic pillars entitled diverse housing and neighborhood options. And the highlights of those that have been included for staff, from staff for us to read is housing 2.1, encourage infill residential development of underutilized sites prime for residential uses, particularly in and near Smithville's downtown. Housing 3.1, encourage additional residential units near existing residential uses to strengthen the neighborhoods of Smithville. Housing 3.2, encourage clustered residential development patterns with connected activity and passive open space and neighborhood and community amenities. Housing 4.2, mandate pedestrian connections in new residential developments to adjacent existing or prospective neighborhoods to further strengthen Smithville's pedestrian network. Housing 4.3, encourage new residential development in and near Smithville's downtown to create a live, work, and play district. We did not have those previously, so I wanted to read those for the public as well tonight for a better understanding of what we review, how we review, and the decisions we do make. I believe items 3 through 9 have all remained the same unless someone on the committee would want to readdress one of those.
Just to clarify, number
Yes.
9 has changed,
Okay,
but it doesn't really,
Today's date.
it's today's
Today's
date
date.
versus December, yes. And it makes reference to tonight's public hearing information, the
Info.
staff report, and the 2 documents that you were provided.
okay. Seeing no other comments or anything, I'll ask Brandy to take roll.
Rob,
Yes.
Deb, Dennis,
Yes.
Mayor Boley,
Aye.
Billy.
Aye.
Melissa,
Aye.
6-0.
This will go to the Board of Aldermen at their next meeting, same time next week, 7 PM.
Item number 6, staff has informed me that this needs to be postponed because they are still working out some issues with the individual that wanted to bring this forwards.
Yes, to postpone it indefinitely, we'll bring it back when we get it resolved. We just don't want to table it
Yep.
because then we
Motion-
got to come back here to get it.
Motion to
started.
postpone number 6 on the agenda, site plan review for KCI RV storage.
Rob got it.
Yeah.
Dennis?
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
We'll move on to item number 7. I'm going to open another public hearing for the conceptual plan for Fairview Crossing North, a commercial subdivision. Anybody from public wishes to speak, you'll have 3 minutes and you'll need to provide your name and address for record. Thank you. And first I'll have staff present an overview.
Again, thank you, Madam Chairman. As you may recall, we've had conceptual plan work in the past. As it relates to the staff report that you've been provided, as evidence for this evening. We've changed the format a little bit and made it a little more, if you read through the ordinance on the process, this will follow it a little more tightly instead of being a kind of a commentary scenario. We changed the staff report to make it follow that very specifically and very precisely. The relevant items that that you need to highlight and look at are that this would be, for all intents and purposes, an extension of the conceptual plan to the south. This property, the entire thing, is already zoned commercial. So this conceptual plan concept is one of the things required associated with our zoning regulations as it relates to lot sizes, frontages, et cetera. And in particular, in this scenario, in B3, all lots created have to have no less than 300 feet of road frontage in our current iteration. Although they can be as small as 10,000 square feet, they have to have 300 feet of road frontage. So the lot size comparison to the road frontage leads to an absurd result that we may want to address in the future, but for purposes of today, that is the primary change in the conceptual plan request, is to allow the lots that are bigger than 10,000 square feet. They're about 40,000 square feet to be created, two of which won't have sufficient frontage on a public street. They'll only have 160 feet or whatever. So that would allow it. It also incorporates some independent landscaping. One of the things that the site plan requires and allows when we bring these forward is that existing vegetation can be counted as it relates to the buffering requirements, et cetera. This plan keeps some of it on the far east side, as you can see, and then adds more where the rest of the site plan ordinance requires it. It is contained in the actual site plan documents. And the conceptual plan is a mimic of the actual proposed single phase final plat that'll come later. So it would allow 6 buildings to be built on it. They are currently identified as 6 independent retail units. They could theoretically be as small strip malls. Keeping in mind that prior to this, there was one 11-unit strip mall on the project site. So the far eastern boundary from its northern edge to the southern edge would include a 30-foot easement for drainage and for utilities to be used. So that area would be protected with the trees as left intact as much as possible. As long as they don't have to put utilities in to take them out, they will. And as my review of the other aspects of it, all the utilities are going to be in front of the buildings on the public street that they've proposed. We go through and identify all of the items in the ordinance in our staff report, and we believe it covers all of the relevant items for you to look at and discuss. And the second document that we'd ask that you certainly review, and that is the additional 4 pages of the conceptual plan document that you have as well. And that's all from a staff perspective.
Thank you, Brandy. I did open the public meetings.
Constance Scott, 308 Killarney Lane, Smithville. Madam, ladies and gentlemen of the Planning and Zoning Committee, good evening and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm the current president of the Hills of Shannon HOA. I'm here tonight to discuss some of the concerns that are still present with the development of 169 and Commercial Highway. Mr. Kreese has reached out and we have started a dialogue of working through our concerns and questions. Our 2 biggest concerns have been the water runoff and privacy loss at property lines. I can appreciate the thought given by Mr. Kreese to the water runoff and the proposed retention pond. It is a relief to hear the water concerns have been recognized as such a high priority, and it is comforting to know that there is a plan in place. However, The concern still remains about the loss of privacy for the homeowners of the Hills of Shannon. While it has been explained that will be a 30-foot utility easement on the back of the lots 4 through 6 with instructions to retain as many trees as possible, it is still a utility easement with no guarantee that the natural buffer will remain. Mr. Kreese, as the current property owner and acting developer, has made a few suggestions for landscape design and/or natural screen barrier. These suggestions are welcomed as they will encourage privacy for both the homeowners and the proposed businesses. Yet, without a solid design concept, it is hard to ensure that these suggestions will remain a part of the development plan of lots 4 through 6 if the utility companies make the final decision and action of removing the trees after the buildings are complete. Or if Mr. Kreese exercises his right to sell the property before the development is complete. This HOA board would like to see in writing the assurances that have been made of the suggestions regarding the landscaping and/or natural barrier that will be enforced once the building begins. We thank Mr. Kreese for the opportunity to speak with him and hear our concerns. We do encourage progress and growth, but our main concern is for the residents of the Hills of and homeowners of Hills of Shannon, their property and their privacy. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Tanya Palmer, and I live at 14702 Shamrock Way here in Smithville. Tonight, I'm going to pull some information from the Smithville webpage, and I'm going to start off with this, I believe, exercise. Steve Sarver stated that I believe that the reasons people have for making Smithville their home include small town feel. Marvin Atkins, our alderman, we were wanting out of Kansas City, so moved to Smithville. It's a nice place to sleep in a smaller town, but it's also nice to be able to wave at your neighbors with all your fingers. Melissa Wilson, we need to figure out how to balance residential and business growth. In the Comprehensive Plan 2030, a community with growing space that is going places, the city of Smithville, Missouri is comfortably and uncomplicated, and it is a desired destination for those who long to live quietly with quick access to convenient amenities while it is closely connected to the Kansas City metropolitan area. Smithville is a serene and far from routine, unassuming with abundant areas of natural beauty. You can leave your mark here. Spread out and stretch out the spaces in Smithville, city of Smithville. 3.1.2. Preserve green space and rural feel. 5.1.2. Intentionally preserve and conserve targeted green open spaces to retain and celebrate Smithville's small town feel. Identifying green space and agricultural areas to protect for the next 10 years will help the city towards its path as a modern community oasis. This conservation spaces include important buffers and view shields throughout the city and in or near all character areas. 6.3. Conserving and preserving Smithville's natural resources include vegetative buffers, wetlands, and streams, protects local ecosystems while celebrating the city's loved rural character. Diverse housing and neighborhood pillar options. HN.2.3, maintain existing quality vegetative buffers and minimize disturbances of ecological features in new residential developments. 5.1.2, intentionally preserve and conserve targeted green open spaces to retain and celebrate Smithville small town feel, identifying green space and agricultural areas to protect the next 10 years will help the city towards its path as a modern community oasis. This conservation space includes important buffers and view shields throughout the city in or near character areas.
Your time is just now up, so I'm that perfectly.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate you hearing what I have to say.
My name is Randy Palmer. I'm at 14702 Shamrock Way in the hills of Shannon. I am one of the immediate people that's going to be affected by this zoning process. And I would like for the buildings to stay close to the street. With that being said, Mr. Shane had a Zoom meeting with the Hills of Shannon board members this morning. I'm just going to talk on his side of that conversation. The back lots will primarily be retail. Probably. There is no known of what is going into these buildings. Lot number 6 may be reoriented. So the plats that are on there are not set in stone. The southern development will leave a huge buffer of trees trying to delineate residential from commercial. Now, this is south of the bank. He's going to put a huge buffer in between the street and his development, but not ours. Goal, trying to leave as much tree lined as possible, but that is public easement and out of my control. I can't say exactly how much of a buffer there will be because of grading. The previous property owner did not take care of the property, and I would like to dig into that. I have physical evidence that I have kept and maintained a portion of the property of the neglected property in question in excess of 10 years, entitling me to seek counsel on adverse possession for the neglected property in qualifying actions such as, I'm not going to go into this right now, but they are true and factual. Per Mr. Shane, lack of maintenance caused all those trees to go back there. That is 100% not the case. When I moved in there, there were 4 evergreens back there. I intentionally allowed some trees to grow, and I intentionally cut down the bad trees, all the scrub. I have all my neighbors right here that can attest to that fact. Get traffic off of 169 and put it on commercial. That's brilliant. 2-lane road that is, I haul a trailer a lot. I'm a lawn care guy in Smithville. I haul a trailer down commercial into my subdivision. It's a tight drive. Whew. Make commercial 15 miles an hour. Is there a 15 mile an hour anywhere in the city? I don't think so. There's a reason why that's 15 mile an hour is because it's unsafe. Commercial has a good line of sight. If you come out of the proposed driveway out of Mr. Shane's development, it will go directly into the Dinosaur gas station. Forgive me. If you look to your right, to the east, you only have about 100 yards of visibility. He's taking away about 150 yards of visibility, making it even more dangerous. Commercial has sufficient width for staging vehicles to get on and off of 169.
I'll let you finish that comment. Your time is up. You finish one more comment.
Engineering can't take place until after the city process. So at the end of the day, if we have to remove trees, we'll remove trees. Thank you.
Matt Cross.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Matt Cross. I'm with Caw Valley Engineering, the civil engineer for this project. 8040 North Oak, Kansas City, Missouri is my business address. Tonight, I just want to kind of go over this site and also the processes that we use to get us to where we are this evening. Google Earth data shows that this site has functioned as a commercial property since at least 1990. Prior to any connector streets to commercial, when the closest residential to the east was off of Deer Run Street, 1.3 miles away. Between the residential and the commercial property, it was all farmland. Current zoning is B3. The intent of this district is to provide a zone which is suitable to accommodate basic retail, service, and office uses. The zoning and intent are to remain with the development of this property. Smithville's 23 Community Vision and Strategic Action Plan states that the projected growth rate is about 28%. which will go from about 10,800 in 2020 to up to 15,000 by 2030. One of the goals of this plan was to provide strengthened business and economic development. A strong local economy with a mix of commercial uses provides a range of important amenities to Smithville's residents. Nearby jobs, easy access to shopping, dining, and entertainment, and retaining wages and spending in the local community. Enhancing commercial tax revenues will allow for more city services that support residents. To ensure that this development met the city's needs while minimizing impacts associated with the commercial development, my team prepared studies, reviewed development code, used best design practices, and worked with the city. We left existing dense, mature vegetation in place on the east side to provide a buffer to the hills of Shannon while promoting stormwater quality. Additional landscaping is proposed for trash screening and site aesthetics. Call Valley prepared a drainage study to analyze the impacts of the proposed development, the stormwater runoff, and design detention to reduce runoff from what currently occurs. BMPs, or best management practices, will also be provided that meet current Mid-America Regional Council standards for runoff water quality. All of this has been reviewed by an outside engineer who is a certified floodplain manager. A traffic analysis was prepared to evaluate the impacts of the development and the new road to Commercial Street. We worked with Central Bank to ensure that they maintained access with minimal impacts to their functionality. Provided sidewalk connectivity via Commercial Street, and an erosion control plan will be provided that protects adjacent properties from the impacts of construction activities. So in summary, we are developing a site that has functioned in a commercial capacity for 30+ years and is intended to remain a business site per the 2030 strategic action plan. The current zoning is being maintained and all development and zoning code has been met.
Your time's up, so I'll let you finish this
Thank you.
comment.
Stormwater runoff and traffic impacts were analyzed and mitigated, and we are intentionally providing a vegetative buffer between the adjacent residential. Thank you, commissioners.
See if there's anybody on Zoom.
Is there anyone via Zoom that would like to speak on this subject?
If not, I will close the hearing. Move on to item number 8. Conceptual plan approval of the Fairview Crossing North. Do I have a motion? And a second?
So moved.
Rob, do I have a second? Any discussion?
So Jack, looking at this plan, the southern road connection connects into what we approved 6 months ago or so,
Yes,
south
actually,
of Central Bank.
yes, actually, that's what's taken this process a good while, was because this had to have a traffic study that incorporated a lot of the stuff from the original Fairview crossing on the south. And it had to go through MoDOT's procedures as well, because this is a new public street onto a state highway. So we went through all of those discussions and negotiations. The developer's been working with, and his engineers have been working with MoDOT as it relates to the bigger issues on the south project. Meanwhile, this one was still going on. So they've had a lot of balls in the air associated with the traffic flow.
Wasn't that existing there already? Isn't that south of the bank there? Wasn't that already existing onto the highway?
The highway part is, I'm talking about the piece towards the middle there where it connects into the other.
Yeah, actually what this involved was negotiating with the bank. They acquired some land from the bank and the existing bank driveway, the south driveway is getting expanded
Yeah.
into some of
Where the ATM is.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is wider. So
It's getting expanded to be able to handle a public street through there instead of that.
So once this is,
driveway.
once this is complete, because this has happened to me a few times, if there's an accident at commercial in 169, this would allow for emergency services, but also allow for not to be sitting on 169 backed up all the way to 435 potentially, right?
That's what the traffic information appears to indicate, that this will become a safety valve, a blow off valve. If there's something at commercial.
Which is also in our comprehensive plan, right?
Yes.
Building additional.
And the transportation master plan.
Okay.
That was the significance of the 147th Street connection with this, so that it could connect to the subdivision to the south. So that the north-south throughfare would help relieve some of the pressure of the growth on 169. As you all know, if you drive up and down 169, south in the morning or north in the business or at the end of the day, there's a lot of traffic on it and continues to grow. In 2017, there was 22,000 vehicles a day on the ADT south of there at the 144th, and is my understanding now that that's already up to 24,000. So those numbers are going up in just 5 years. And there hasn't been any significant development around the area. It's all north. So yeah, there's a significant push on that.
Do we have any rules where we have business butting up against R1? Is there a set of rules on fencing or is it just open?
It's the landscape buffering as it relates to the trees and vegetation. If in the event that any of those trees go away, as it associated with that, the lots, then when the buildings go in, they'll have to at least meet the minimum standards. Right now, the current set of trees in that area is probably 7 or 8 times what our minimum standards are.
So also the utility providers we're talking about in here is us, right?
What
The sewer utility is mostly city.
anybody digging
Yeah.
is going to be the city services up front, which are going to be the water and sewer. Usually the back easements are the guys that are boring cable lines in.
So they won't be cutting down trees. They'd be boring.
Well, I can't tell you that for sure. I've seen them do crazier stuff.
But if the development were to put in conduit or something through there, they wouldn't have to worry about it.
Yeah, ultimately, the goal would be that everything be shot. The other thing, we have a procedure in place for anyone using a public easement that they have to make restoration. So they avoid the big stuff.
You probably will have power coming in.
Yeah,
On
I'm
the
sure.
backside.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would suspect power will come back there, although it could come through the center to serve.
What already had
both
power on the
lots.
site, right?
Well, yeah, there's power there.
Yeah,
It's
but-
probably not enough power.
Right.
So they're gonna have to add some.
But they can't
sectionalizers.
run it overhead anyway. They'd have to go
Yeah, no,
probably
it's
under
all-
the street.
Everything's underground
Yeah.
on new development. So they may have a drop coming off of an existing pole if there's an. Yeah. Yeah, so they'll have to do a sectionalized, they'll have to put in one of those big.
It'd make
um,
more sense to conduit down the street than.
So the other aspect I'd like to clarify, and I've identified it in the staff report, is this conceptual overlay is the maximum density that could happen here. If they want to address that by reducing the density, and by density, I mean square footage. We've got, I don't know, 75,000 or whatever it is, square foot of buildings. We've also got the parking issues addressed. If they wanted to address, for example, if they wanted to take lot 6 and lot 5 and merge them into one big lot and put a bigger building in it, that building could not throw the numbers over what the existing numbers are. So it's 6 and 7,200, I think. So it could be no bigger than 13,200. And they would have to address to make sure that the parking is met as well. The current iteration has more than enough parking for all of it. and it has more than enough lot coverage scenarios. We've got limitations that we like to see on lot coverage because it reduces the amount of extra drainage. So anything that goes onto a hard surface has to drain and go into a detention basin. If we can reduce that, the more the better. Lastly, in the staff report, while this is zoning related, it is not handled like a rezoning case. So in the last rezoning matter earlier, you had a scenario where you had the 8 findings of fact, et cetera. This one is handled differently. And the guidelines that are identified in the staff report are the guidelines that you must base your decision on. So that's why I laid it out in that structure.
I wanted to ask a question back on the traffic study
Mhm.
on commercial. The street coming onto commercial there, since that's real close to that curve down there.
Mhm.
Was there any thought process or discussion as the city grows and there's more traffic, let's say there of a traffic light going in there or something to help? Since that's around the corner, so close to that corner.
As it relate, actually, the site distances and all those things were taken into account associated with the traffic report, the traffic study that was done. And I would like to clarify that the 15 mph scenario would apply to the north-south street and not commercial itself.
Within the
Yeah,
shopping center.
within the shopping center would be a 15 mph zone. That's what they recommend.
And I guess, is there the possibility that there would need to be a stoplight there or something to slow traffic down a little bit more around that corner coming out of?
As it relates to, no, the traffic numbers are not. And keep in mind, Hills of Shannon is one of the highest traffic generating subdivisions we have. And it doesn't, even with that and all the other stuff up there, it doesn't throw it over.
Well, also when Hills of Shannon was approved, it was what, 3 times the size it is now? 2 times? 'Cause
Yeah,
they gave
there
up
was a lot more.
250 lots when
Yeah.
and subdivided, right? Then
Yeah.
that's all on 144th now, not
right.
through there, so.
Yeah.
So their traffic study is a fraction of what it was going to be.
Yes, yeah. And that's the other thing, where the curb stops is where the property line ends, just so if you were wondering why there wasn't showing anything going up to connect Hills of Shannon to it, that little triangle parcel is actually the HOA's property. They own that little sliver that comes down. Yes, yeah. If you look, you can kind of see the triangular flat triangle on that
with the
arc
little
of the
bushes on it.
commercial.
Mhm.
That is owned by the Hills of Shannon HOA. Mhm.
Does that preclude any more landscaping from being built? Could more landscaping be built into that area in order to provide a little bit more peace and quiet?
The difficulty would be, it's a drainage area. It's low. As it comes down through there, the farther south you get, the deeper it gets. So as that property is graded to make it flat to the west, it's going to really highlight that valley to keep the water in that drainage area. So the lowest spot is going to be where you'd be putting trees. It's putting a fence at the bottom of the hill. It wouldn't,
Would have to be
even if
really,
it was
really
water
tall.
resistant, even if it was water resistant, it'd have to be, 15 years old before it'd get up to.
Yeah, the existing trees look like they're pretty dense and oak and
Yeah.
a lot of leaves on them.
Yeah. And when you get through there, you can tell pretty significantly how most of the trees are, what we affectionately call sucker trees. They come in and just, they're 3 to 6 inches in size. So they're, 25 years old at the oldest, I would suspect. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the items that's addressed in the conceptual plan
Yeah, we make sure you-
considerations.
Mike's on.
Yeah, in the conceptual plan considerations, keeping in mind, if this wasn't brought for a conceptual plan, there's nothing to require any of that stuff to stay. If it was, one big building going in or something, they can clear cut that stuff. So as much as they can keep, that was our goal as a staff. And it was clearly their goal as well. But I think going in, they were aware it was going to be a big concern from adjacent property owners. So.
So Jack, you referenced two of the lots would be under that 300-foot street frontage.
Yeah. Lots 4 and 5.
Lots 4
They're
and
about
5.
150, 160
Okay.
foot, maybe something like that. All the rest of them have double frontage. So lot 1, 2, and 3 have frontage on the new street and on 169. And lot 6 has both the commercial side to it and the other side. So. And again, it's the road frontage scenario that is causing the conceptual plan requirement. Otherwise, it wouldn't be required. Keeping in mind, I mentioned earlier in the staff or in the public hearing, the minimum lot size in our code for B3 is 10,000 square feet. So a little less than a quarter acre. But we still have a remnant of that 300-foot frontage. So if you had the minimum lot size of 10,000 feet, you'd have to have 33 foot or 300 foot of frontage, but your lot would be 33 foot deep. So those numbers don't math out very well. And in the future, I would suggest that we do a little research for you to give you guys a better picture of what other communities might be doing here. So you may want to look at that 300-foot frontage. That used to be the number on nearly everything except for residential. Ag was 300. Industrial was, everything was 300 foot. Not 100% certain what the underlying logic was for having that big of a lot.
What's the distance between the back of, say, 4, 5, and 6? The back side of the building and the Hills of Shannon property line?
I would best guesstimate that if you look, you will see there are multiple lines that go through there. The full length dashed line, which is the second one over, that's the easement area of 30 feet. So giving that roughly, it looks like the closest building is lot 6 building. And it sets probably 70 feet away, probably, it's a guesstimate.
But that building doesn't line up with any of the houses, looking at the map.
Lot 6?
You, like the very bottom corner of lot 6 does.
Yeah.
But not the building itself. The building's close
So,
to commercial.
but you're looking at 60 to 70 feet, so.
Okay, so 60 to 70 feet between back of the building and Hills of Shannon.
To that property.
Where does that shaded, that zone or loading, unloading or something? What's that shaded area?
Yeah, it says loading zone.
I'm not certain where you're pointing. I
Behind lot
apologize.
5 and 6, there's that shading that's between the building and the easement. It's identified as number.
Well, to the extent that I'm older than both of you, I'm going to get out
Yeah.
my Zoom.
Here, Jack.
Says loading,
Okay,
doesn't it?
loading and unloading. Okay, yeah.
Yes, it's loading
That way,
zones.
my assumption is looking at it, that's where a vehicle dropping off supplies, if it's a retail store of some kind, they will go back there, park that truck, unload into the back of the building and yeah, my guess is, yeah, they wouldn't be able to get in and around, yeah.
trash is back there too.
Saying trash and how narrow those openings look going into those lots. Will the trash truck be able to get back there?
Yeah. They're
Yes.
bigger than you think. I would
Okay.
imagine these are all commercial 24s. Yeah,
Okay.
and there's a program engineers have that allows them to run turns.
Okay, another question I have is about security lighting, things like that. Would,
The buildings under our code, the
Yeah.
buildings can have security lighting
right,
on them directly. But if
but
there's
it
any,
should not bleed over into.
yeah, it
okay.
shouldn't be focused onto the other. It should, if it's security, it should be shining down. We do not have a hooding requirement for security lighting. If however, they have parking lot lighting, there is a substantially larger scenario. And they would have to provide
Could be more of a shielded light then.
yes, and they'd have to provide a photo plan, photometric. I knew it was photo something. Photometric. I knew it wasn't photograph, a photometric plan, which is an evaluation of the exact light. And it tells you how many foot candles it radiates out, and they have to keep it radiating away from.
I'm just looking for ways to
Lessen the impact.
lessen the impact.
Sure.
To protect.
And this site plan doesn't go to the level of what it could, which is the actual building design. We've had one of those since I've been here, and that was the building design up at the Price Chopper area. They have a building design, so their design aesthetic is there, their lighting aesthetic is there, all of that is incorporated. This one doesn't have any of that, so the buildings and their lighting and all those other things would have to come in as they're built, and you guys would review them at that time.
Right, but this is preliminary. Just basic concept.
Well, that's why it's called a
Yeah,
conceptual
I got
plan.
that.
Yes. And again, it's addressing the lot size scenario we have with our code and street frontage. Like I said, these are all 4 times larger than the minimum size of our code. However, the 300-foot thing becomes problematic. I think the other aspect I want you to keep in mind, the entrance right there by the McDonald's that used to go into the strip mall. If you look, that's going away. And it's got to go away. That's why the other ones moved over to keep the traffic from those queues. You know, you're pulling out of there. McDonald's, we can't control any aspect of it yet, but you know, when you've got people trying to turn left to get in out of the existing, when it was a strip mall, you know, they may have to wait a while because 3 cars and they wouldn't be able to go left.
Actually, that was a problem years ago too.
Yeah, and it's been a problem for, it became a problem when they widened the highway. Once the highway widened, it became even more problematic. So that went away, and there's a cross access between lots 1, 2, and 3 through the 169 entrance, the shared entrance with the bank. So that's still there, but then they will be able to go back and forth to the new street. Just can't go out onto commercial right there at the entrance.
So I guess in looking at this, talking about the bank, where you can turn into the bank now off of 169, will that remain?
Yes, there are 2. So you've got the main one that's shared,
Mhm.
where you can come into the bank and turn, enter and turn to the right to go to the bank, or you used to go left to the strip mall. That one's going to stay there. It's existing here. The one to the south, which is the one that takes you to the ATM or up to the back entrance of the bank, that's what's going to become a public street. And it'll change that. So the entrances on 169 basically stay the same, except for the one on the south. And it will pick up some size because it's a public street.
Jack, I'm curious on buildings 4 and 5 and the 300-foot rule that we have. Would we have to adjust the entire ordinance or could they apply for a variance?
Well, no, that's what this conceptual plan does. The only significant issue this conceptual plan does is allows them to change, if they've got a overall design, the lot frontage requirements.
In effect, it's variance.
It works as what the common lay term of a variance, when you think of a variance, it works that way, but this one has to, this method requires it to have everything thought out ahead. You have to have the traffic study, you have to have the layout, all those other things that are evaluatable have to be done in order to go through this process. Otherwise, to answer your question, if they were wanting to get a true variance, it would be exceedingly difficult to get one without showing all of the other things that this shows. You have to show not only the reason you want to do it, that you also can show that you're meeting the intent of the code to protect the traveling public.
And from the stormwater concerns, it looks like that pond they're building is about 15 feet deep. That's pretty,
And it's a dry bottom, to keep that in mind. So it won't be a big lake or pond. It's a dry bottom and intended to be a dry bottom. So
so yeah, if we get a substantial rain, it'll detain it.
yeah, it'll fill it up and then slowly drain it all out. All the water that goes through that area now will still go through that area. It just goes slower because obviously the paving and the buildings will speed up the water. They just have to rotate it here. And as it relates to that, the detention study, the detention or stormwater study that they provided was reviewed by our engineers. They are currently negotiating issues associated with the final document construction plans, which are down the road. If this gets approved, then that's where our engineers have identified and they've already agreed to, we've got to meet these standards. And this is how we will go about it when we get to the actual construction plans.
Are detention ponds required? Do we have a requirement on detention ponds to have fencing?
No. And then again, in this scenario, it's a dry bottom. So the only time it's going to be full of water is during or immediately following a big rainstorm.
And it's a natural loss of water rather than feeding off into something else and creating another issue.
Oh, yeah, and this will all drain onto Fairview Crossing versus Fairview Crossing North, that drainage basin that goes through there. And they'll have to address not only all of the water from the south site, they'll have to address the water that this site brings into it, which is why, as the engineer indicated, they've oversized it so that they can keep it, they can slow it down, which will make it easier when they do any detention requirements on the south property. Because all this, as you all know, drains all the way over to the creek and the end of 144th Street. That gentleman's been in several times.
And then it comes back down here.
Yeah, so ultimately, the plan is to slow it all down.
Yeah, because the storm lines that are identified, those are ours, not, because MoDOT has their own there too, but we can't use theirs.
Right.
They're all new.
Yeah, the MoDOT culverts that come out and under, they just don't let anyone connect to
Yeah.
them. They're air gapped.
Did the old strip center have stormwater lines in it? So it'll help.
No.
It'll help.
No,
some
it
of
was
that.
built prior to our evaluating stormwater. All of this area was done prior to it, even the bank. No detention on the bank, McDonald's. To be quite frank, there's very limited on Hills of Shannon.
It looks like they're
itself.
adding stormwater near the bank too, so
Mhm.
it should help them. Okay. Yeah, my phone magnifying glass.
There's significantly more attention paid to this than there was in the original building. That's for sure. I used to work in an office in that strip mall. It was a nightmare. Okay.
Any more questions? Seeing none, I'll have Brandy. Call roll.
Mayor Boley,
Yes.
Billy,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Deb,
Yes.
Alderman Chevalier.
Wasn't here for the public comment, so I'm gonna abstain.
Thank you.
And Rob,
Yes.
6-0 with one abstain.
This will be on the next week's Board of Aldermen meeting as an ordinance.
On to item number 9. Going to open a public hearing on the single phase final plat Fairview Crossing North, a commercial subdivision to create 6 lots. And I'll first ask staff for an overview.
Much of the items to discuss in this one, we just went over because they have a significant overlap. The conceptual plan is to allow the division of property in the fashion that this plat shows. It would create 6 lots and it would dedicate public streets, 147th coming off of 169, and it would come in and transition into a new Fairview Drive, which would then come out onto South Commercial. This is actually what generated the traffic study, the stormwater and all that. That's where we look at it in the subdivision side. In the scenario with the conceptual plan, it was important issues to be addressed there as well. So that's why we discussed it. But all of those studies were done by the developer at their cost, and it was reviewed by the city's engineers. And in relates to the traffic stuff, MoDOT and their engineers as well. There was concern internally about what might have to happen at Fairview and Commercial, or if Commercial might need to be widened, but MoDOT was clear in its, no, it doesn't need that, don't do that. Any changes here impacts their traffic scenario. Everyone understands that eventually the programming on that light may need to change, especially if and when Commercial goes to the further to the west. Transportation Master Plan has it going all the way to the end of the city limits eventually. So as that comes, the traffic light may need to adjust at Commercial, but the traffic studies were all good. Although it seems when you're looking at it here that the distance from the Hills of Shannon entrance to down there is a short distance, but it is well beyond the standards that are required for all of those things. The document lays out all the curve tangents. It has everything that we're talking about. In this scenario, I've got a staff report as well that we went out and identified all of the relevant issues per the code, where you guys have to look at it. It's the same stuff you've seen on every other subdivision that we come through on a single phase final plat approval. The single phase final plat approval is such that when they start construction, they have to build all the streets, all the sewer, all the water, and all the stormwater all at once to have it all done up front. And then they can come back and start selling lots or building on it. Unless, like in several developments around town, they put up a significant bond that guarantees that the water, the sewer, the street, and the storm all get constructed. And if they do put up that bond, they can allow a building to be constructed simultaneously. The last time we did this was at the medical marijuana facility. That developer put up a bond to allow them to start construction. Because at that time, they were fully aware that the construction of the medical marijuana facility was going to take longer than it was for all of the development stuff. So, and it did by far. So that's why they put the bond up associated with that. Staff reports identifies all the issues. If you have any questions, we'll talk about it at the next part, but I think that covers everything.
Randy, public comments?
Again, Randy Palmer, 14702 Shamrock Way, Smithville, in the Hills of Shannon. Luckily, I signed up for 7 and 9 because all I've heard tonight is could be, might be. We don't know. We don't know what's going on over there. Let's talk about visual distance compared to west to east as you come out of this new subdivision. If you come out of this subdivision heading towards McDonald's and you look to your left, there's a significant distance, sight distance to safely get out of that parking lot. If we turn to the right and face downtown, as mentioned, the corner stops or starts right there at the entrance. It's a valid safety concern that you cannot see over the hill and around the corner. I come upon this going into Hills of Shannon every time I come here. Drainage will fall to the east and wash out of the properties. So as he mentioned, the water will no longer go towards the west. It will go towards the east. What the pavement doesn't capture, our ditches will. Our ditches are not our property, but they are very close to being washed out by waters coming down those ditches. If the water management is not negated properly, we will have washout of our properties, and then who is going to be responsible for filling of our properties or riprap back there, or whatever needs to be. Building distance from the property. The building may be 70 feet from the property, but do not underestimate. The property will be 30 feet from our property line. Whether it be a building or vehicles or curbs, it will be 30 feet. As stated earlier, 30 years used as commercial land is a false statement. If you look on Google Earth, it'll take you clear back to the early 2000s. When they built that strip mall there, they took a bulldozer, pushed all that dirt back to where it is now, where the tree line is. All that property back there has not been used commercially, and as stated before, I've been taking care of that property for 14 years. Security lighting, and parking lighting. If you think it's a nuisance to have McDonald's a quarter mile away from your house, it's going to be a nightmare having these security lights in my backyard. I can't believe they're going to get away with this. Buildings are not designed for that specific area for 300 feet frontage. This corner property is not designed for this kind of infrastructure to be on this corner. No fencing on retention pond. All I have to say is Hills of Shannon kids. You're telling me that there's not going to be a fence there. I know that kids play back in these woods all the time. There's trails all over the place. Kids will be playing in this pond if they have a chance. With all of this other stuff going into motion, we are going to limit thank you. Wild habitat approaching our backyard.
Jennifer Justice.
Good evening, Planning and Zoning Committee. I am Jennifer Justice. I live at 13317 Mount Olivet Road, Smithfield, Missouri. I am here to thank you guys and thank our city so much for the thoughtfulness that goes into allowing the public comment and allowing our citizens to come forth. Because I can tell you that being involved in a number of planning and zoning committees throughout our greater Kansas City, Missouri area, this is not the case. Recently, I was in Planning and Zoning in Liberty. Planning and Zoning in Liberty allows 0 public comment. The city council meeting in Liberty only allows 2 minutes per person at the beginning of each meeting. So I think that we do take it for granted, the thoughtfulness and the allowance of constituents to participate in this process. And I also applaud our local investors for reaching out to the community. We take it for granted that these local developers are reaching out to our community. I cannot tell you the number of times I've been involved in Kansas City, Missouri. The developers come in and mow us over. The developments are done before anyone can really understand what is going on. And frequently, these deals may be made behind closed doors. So I really have so much gratitude for the way that we function in this city. And I just think it's an important piece to give that in public comment so that other people can hear a part of this process. I've been involved for about 2 decades in different planning and zoning processes through being the chair of advocacy for Missouri and other groups that are advocacy related. Clay County is another example of how our Clay County Commission functioned for so many years, not allowing the public to be involved. So I thank you again for your willingness to hear the public and to give thoughtful nature to the questions that you're asking and to really consider what is best for our community instead of just thinking about tax dollars. Thank you.
Bradley Scott.
There you go. Bradley Scott, 418 Shannon Avenue. I picked up, I'm from Hills of Shannon. I really don't have a great prepared speech, so good for you guys. This will go quick. 23-year resident in Smithville, 23-year resident in Hills of Shannon. I come up here today really to talk about the fact that I'm for development, but I think this is a tale of two cities. The front end, we should develop. It's looked like crap forever. It's been developed. That's the commercial part. My push and my rub is the back half. That has never been commercial. That has never been commercial around any of our properties. My concern goes beyond the 5 homes that are there, but to the 261 homes that are in the neighborhood. 1% loss on those home values that will come by putting a commercial building that close is going to be thousands of dollars to homeowners that's their primary income or their primary biggest investment. We're casting that aside so we can put a business right up against their homes for no reason. You know, I support Mr. Crees on what he's doing for this city. I love what he's got planned south of that. I love what we got planned on the front. But let's invest in what's important for that back half. Let's make it a green space. Let's make it a park. Let's make it what it's been, open land. We all know utilities don't go through an easement and save trees. They don't do it. If they do, show me one place in Smithville they've done it. They just don't do it. So we're preparing to hurt homeowners, not only them, but every homeowner there when those houses are going to be the comps for everyone else. So we're thinking about one person's economics right now. I'm asking you to think about the economics for 261 homes. With that, I'll end.
Christine Bunch, 18608 Primrose. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but it's really hard to sit here when, Jack, you said once again something that concerns me. You said usually it takes a long process and usually you have to go through many steps and usually I need to watch the video tonight, but it upset me so much because why are you giving this a pass? Why are you fast tracking something that was purchased in December? Slow down a little bit. It's not that we're opposed to development. It's just you're going to back this up to residents and it's going to be in their backyard. I mean, it just makes me sad watching this happen. So if usually you slow down and usually it takes a longer process, then take that long process.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Shane Crease, 13530 Mount Olivet Road, Smithville, Missouri. I am the applicant on the project. Many of the points that I was going to bring up, Matt discussed earlier, so I'll skip a lot of those. I think, you know, ultimately to what was just said, the design and engineering of this project has been in the works for many, many months, much longer than when I closed on the property in December. So the property went under contract in July of last year, to put it in perspective. So I invested in the engineering design to try to develop this in a manner that met the city's long-term comprehensive plan, took into a lot of these things into consideration, like what was mentioned, the tie-in and development to the project to the south. So there was good continuity. There was good traffic flow. There were many things thought of. There is a natural buffer that's going to be left. If not, we meet the city's requirements, or will be required to. Each of these sites will have to go in front of this commission again, as Jack mentioned. So if there are any concerns, they can be addressed at this time. Ultimately, the site is currently zone B3. And it's commercial, and it has been there longer than any neighboring adjacent residential subdivision. So with that, I thank you for your consideration. That's all I have.
Is there anyone via Zoom that would like to speak on the subject?
You lost my Zoom thing.
Seeing no more comments from the public, we'll close the public hearing. Move on to item number 10. Single phase final plat Fairview Crossing North. Do I have a motion second?
So
Billy, do I have a second?
Is that Billy? Okay, sorry.
And then Rob second. Discussion.
Um, throughout this process, was there any steps that have been skipped or not thought of?
As it relates to this,
Mhm.
no, the extra steps that I mentioned that we were talking about was based upon a question associated with a variance, what a variance does. And it's a long drawn out process that you guys don't even consider. You're not involved in a variance. It's basically a court type procedure in front of a separate body. And it would be exceedingly difficult. Our scenario is we made significant changes to our codes in 2013. We were not quite ready to do a unified development code. From the planning commissioners level, they weren't ready to go that far. So we weren't able to address everything in one big document. So what we tried to do was to address the zoning code and the subdivision code so that they would coalesce within another 10 or 15 years. We could do a UDO, which then is one big amalgamated decision-making process that addresses literally everything through zoning and subdivision all into one development ordinance scenario. In that process, some of the finer details were slipped, like the 300-foot frontage scenario. So that's what put us in this. Long-term, I think it would be something we ought to evaluate, but as it relates to this project, no. This project has been, as Mr. We've been talking about this particular project with Mr. Crease, his engineers and the city's engineers and public works since before December, because there were a bunch of issues that before he was going to close, he wanted to make sure what the requirements were, how much money he was going to have to spend for all of these things. And as a matter of fact, there was a different developer looking at this with a very similar concept that ultimately, when that developer pulled out, Mr. Crease came into the fold and said, this will improve the traffic over on everything to get a pass through all the way from commercial to 144th when this is all said and done. 20 years down the road, we don't know for sure. It depends on how quickly we develop, but so it was all tied together. But from a standpoint of, did we skip a step? No. Traffic studies were done, stormwater studies were done. Engineering review of all of the design was completed. So everything was done well in advance. We went through, addressed it with the fire district because they've got turn radius issues and what they're concerned about, the ability to get fire hydrants and all those things. Those will be addressed more in depth when we get to the actual design of the construction plans. Things change significantly when you get into there because now you've got to, not only are you doing surveys, you're doing surveys for spot surveys all the way through it. So it gets a lot more expensive. So once those, if this is approved as a plat, they would have to come back with construction plans that go through a separate review process through our Public Works Director, Chuck Souls, and the city engineering firm that does our reviews. And then we do a give and take back and forth with the design concept to make sure it meets our standards and it's something that they can build on their property. If not, our engineers work with their engineers to coordinate how that would happen that addresses stormwater. Our engineering review firm has been clearly identified or clearly discussed and notified. Number one priority for us as a city is the stormwater. It's been a problem here because it was never addressed for decades. Everything was just get it to the natural drainage and leave it, including the area to the west of Hills of Shannon and around. So no, we go through every step. Before I even put something on the agenda, I need to make sure it's went through Public Works to make sure he's fine with everything. And then we have the transportation master plan, the stormwater or the stormwater plans under development now. We've got a sewer master plan and a water master plan. All those master plans have to be addressed when they come through our development review committee stuff, which is the internal stuff.
Yeah, so essentially what I was just getting at, is that, the sale, right? A sale of a property, it's not necessarily meaning that things aren't getting done. There's a process and everyone has to go through it. Just the sale date really is kind of immaterial at this point, right? I mean,
Well, the sale date would be from a staff perspective, if it goes through and reaches closing and sells, it tells me the developer's done enough of the evaluation that they can make it work financially if they meet all of our standards. They just have to figure out what our standards are, what our interpretation of our master plans are, all of those items. And if they're comfortable at that point, they close and start the hard stuff.
A lot of these that come to us haven't closed, right? That's a condition of closing is sometimes they have to be able to have a plan or rezoning done, correct?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
And
That's
MoDOT
often
doesn't
the
do
case.
anything fast.
Well, yes.
And last I checked, call engineering is pretty backed up, so this didn't happen since December, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it doesn't help that MoDOT's had 2 retirements of significant
Right.
people since we started the whole Fairview discussion.
Well,
One guy gets it through to a certain points and then retires. So we bring in another guy and he just retired. So
And they started having public sessions on 188th Street 4 years ago. So they're still working on that one.
Yep.
Another question, one of the property owners mentioned, concerns of the pond fencing. This being a dry pond, and I'm glad the HOA president for Hills of Shannon is here because I do have concerns with their year-round pond, and we do have a grant program through the city. It'd be nice to see an application come in for fencing that pond off. If you guys have concerns about kids getting into those ponds, so there's an avenue for that if you'd like to pursue it. Anybody else?
Building
gonna
on what
ask-
John was just saying, it's been my understanding for years, because at one time I was also a licensed realtor and dealt with minimal commercial, but it was not unusual for a developer to put a contract on a property and have it subject to traffic study, subject to all of that stuff, so that the public understands that, the confirming that, because you put a contract on a property and then you start going through all these processes, determine what has to happen to make it financially feasible to complete it and get to this point. The time you start and the time you finish with a closing date can take months and sometimes years to get to that point. So while it might appear that things have been rushed, they have not.
I've been working on this since last.
Well, and besides that, we still have 2 more meetings of the Board of Aldermen this has to go through, and then
Exactly.
whenever every building comes in, it's got to come through that, so it's going to be a while. Not getting built tomorrow.
I wanted to address like talk a little bit more about the fence around the drain area. I know there's a lot of other areas in town, like I was up to the development behind the high school. And there's an open pond at the north side of that. So with that being mentioned, is that something that we as a city should look at with those open areas, requiring some type of really good fencing around all of those open ponds? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there that
I mean,
this won't be the only one, because I just went up there to see how that development was coming along the other day, and at the north side of that, there's that open pond down in there as well.
Yeah.
So just food
And I
for
will tell
thought
you,
for future.
Sure, and we can certainly evaluate it. The biggest concern with fencing is somebody's got to maintain that area. And if they're not being maintained, that then becomes the biggest complaint. It's all the weeds and brush and all that. So it's a trade-off. Most do not have it.
I
Most
got a
detention.
thought on that too. You know, Harbor Lakes, we've got a lake. And yeah, kids goof off. Yeah,
Well,
I mean, that's.
well, and as it relates to a detention basin though,
Right.
they're slightly different
Right,
than yours in your subdivision.
Yeah.
Does act as a detention basin. Stonebridge by the high school,
yeah.
it acts as a detention basin. Hills of Shannon's pond at the bottom of it acts as a detention basin. So, you know, most of them are in Cedar Lake Estates is another one that
Right.
has, theirs acts as a detention basin. That usually something in residential, to be quite frank, because it's an amenity that looks nice. Commercial generally don't want the lakes unless they've got a big area where they can put the fountains and all that other stuff. You see a lot of that over in Johnson County, where they've got these big lakes with fountains in it. And that's actually a detention basin. It's a wet bottom detention basin so that it'll hold the water and they can make it an amenity. But when it rains, it fills up. And that's, you know, this basin in particular is a dry bottom. So it will only be full while the rain is coming, it fills up. And then after the rain stops, it starts going down. And the goal is to make it look like grass. They generally will mow it all the time. How much rain we get at any given time.
I was just thinking that if we started going down that road for fencing
Right.
for that, then we'd end up with problems with subdivisions with lakes. There's water's water.
Well, and there is a venue to address it. I think we're going through the stormwater master plan process now. That stuff is going on. That would be where you address it. That's the only significant utility or utility-like scenario that we have not completed the master planning process on. And as you all know, we've got all kinds of natural drainage areas that have become problematic for folks. And in our design aspect of it, it's no longer just a water flooding issue. We also have to make sure that the water quality is such that it can't be dirty water. So you got to get it vegetated and with the new MS4 permit that's coming in another 2 years, I think it is. I suspect at that time, the state will require the city to take samples of every outfall where it comes out of a pipe into a creek or whatever. So we'll have to measure that to see what the biosolids are, any of that, you know, they've got a testing spectrum you have to go through. We'll have to start that process, which is, to be quite frank, once we get to that process, having a dry bottom basin like this makes it a lot easier because it's going to help clean the water. The more vegetation that water goes through, the cleaner it gets. Excuse me.
Any other?
I do. I don't even need them.
You need a cough drop.
I just ran out myself, so, well, hopefully we're not here.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? I'll have Randy call roll.
Alderman Chevalier,
Yes.
Melissa,
Yes.
Billy, Mayor Boley, Dennis,
Yes.
Deb,
Yes.
and Rob,
Yes.
7-0.
This item will not be on the agenda next week. It has to wait until the conceptual plan second reading, so it'll go to the next meeting after that,
Which is March.
something like that. Yes, it's February. It's only got 28 days, so everything's exactly the same.
I have a motion second to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're adjourned.